Silas McCreary had spent most of his 62 years chasing the purest note a spruce belly and maple back could give him, yet on that September morning it was a single sour sound that brought him up short. The big doors of his hillside workshop were flung wide, letting in bands of sunlight and the peppery scent of fallen leaves. He'd just tightened the final string on a butter-blonde fiddle meant for the county harvest festival, when, from somewhere beyond the doorway, came an echo of his G major arpeggio, only flattened, as if the mountain itself had swallowed the tone and spit it back out crooked. He set the instrument down gently, the way another man might lower a sleeping child, and walked to the threshold. The woods behind the shop were a familiar choir, chickadees, wind fussing in hemlock branches, the distant hush of Bluebird Creek. But that new sound, raw and metallic, didn't belong. It quivered a moment longer, then died. "Must be the holler talking back," he muttered, rubbing a thumb over the callus on his forefinger. Still, Silas had lived on this ridge all his life, and never once heard an echo that came back different from the note he'd sent out. Mountain acoustics could be tricky, but they weren't dishonest. He tried again, this time playing a plain middle C with the door half shut. The echo returned as a ghost of itself, bent and brassy. A chill, half curiosity, half foreboding, slipped under his collared shirt. By lunchtime he'd carried 3 more fiddles onto the stoop and produced the same distorted reply every time. The trouble wasn't in his instruments. Something in the woods, something hollow and resonant, was joining the conversation. Silas packed away his chisels, locked up, and ambled down the dirt lane to Nettie May's General, where news travelled faster than cell phones ever could. Nettie May herself stood behind the counter, sleeves dusted with biscuit flour. Next to her waited Charlotte Beck, a retired science teacher who quilted, kept bees, and had adopted more stray cats than the town's census cared to count. "You're wearing your listening face," Charlotte said, sliding a jar of sorghum into her basket. Silas explained the warped echoes, while Nettie May poured him coffee into a mug shaped like a rooster. "Maybe you got yourself a banshee," Nettie May teased. "Or maybe them strings know you're overdue for a day off." Charlotte took a more practical turn. "Metal will ring back at you if you smack it with the right frequency. Could be someone's hammering on scrap out there." "Not much industry up my hillside besides sawdust and fiddle shavings," Silas said. Charlotte's grey brows knit. "Unless it's the old mining spur. Lots of rusting equipment in them woods. Sound carries strange through hollow pipes." Silas thanked them, but the idea wouldn't settle. The echo had felt intentional, like a harmony offered by something that knew it could not stay in tune. That evening after supper, he slung his weathered rucksack across one shoulder, tucking a flashlight, penknife, and wedge of cornbread inside. He lifted his favourite workshop fiddle, the first he'd ever built, scarred from years of demonstrations, and stepped off the porch as twilight poured purple into the gaps between trees. He followed the path beyond the firewood stack, past a stand of young poplars whispering in the warm wind. When the trail forked, he veered left toward deeper shade, letting memory guide him along the remnants of a logging road no vehicle had troubled since his grandfather's day. Finally, he stopped beside a moss-mottled boulder and raised the fiddle to his chin. The clear E he played drifted out and bounced against the mountainside. His own reflection came back sweet, but piggybacked on it was the very same warped, brassy groan. Only now, wrapped in the hush of nightfall, he could pinpoint the direction, downslope, somewhere near the old creek gulch. Silas inched forward. The air thickened with a smell he hadn't met since boyhood. Fermented corn mash, yeasty, ripe, and illegal as sin. He doused his flashlight, letting the moon handle the shadows, and moved until copper glinted in a thicket below. There, half buried under brush, squatted a moonshine still. Condenser coils coiled like metal snakes, oak barrels crouched beside them, staves sweating sticky liquor. So that's your echo, he thought. The kettle domes were amplifying his notes, belching them back wrong. But why had the still come alive now, after decades of silence? Prohibition days were long gone, and yet the ridge folk still whispered about revenuers and secret distillers as though they might step from the rhododendrons at any minute. A crack of twigs jerked him behind a maple trunk. He held his breath while a figure crossed the clearing, a lanky man in a denim jacket. Moonshine shivered silver off a hunting knife at the man's belt. Silas recognized him, Levi Puckett, a sometime farmhand with rapid eyes and a knack for trouble. Levi bent to stir the fire under the boiler. Another sound drifted up, faint yet unmistakable, the rise and fall of a fiddle scale, though no one played. The echo again, but triggered by what? Levi's hammer? Silas frowned. The man struck nothing. Levi straightened abruptly, head cocked. Silas eased backward, praying the night would swallow him. When he reached the logging road, he ran until the stitch in his side flared like hot iron. Back home he barred the workshop door and sat in the dark, the old fiddle across his knees. Moonshine stills, sharpened knives, and crooked echoes. Not a harmony he cared to revisit alone. He'd need help, and not just from the sheriff. Deputy Amos Harper was competent, but local rum-runners had a way of vanishing evidence before a badge arrived. Silas needed caring eyes, gossip's reach, and the courage to traipse through woods at dawn. So he baked cinnamon biscuits before sunup, stuffed them into a tin, and carried them to Charlotte's house. One whiff, and she snapped the lid open. "I'll trade you intel for pastry," she declared. Over steaming mugs of chicory coffee, he told her what he'd seen. Still mash and Levi Puckett. Charlotte set down her cup with a thunk. Levi's slippery as creek eel, but why's he tinkering with copper kettles when anyone with cash can buy legal whiskey at News Landing? Silas shrugged. Old habits? Higher profit? Some folks chase outlaw legends like they chase lightning bugs. Charlotte leaned forward. "Did you hear about Junebug Turner?" Junebug was a local string band picker, younger than spring lettuce, who often borrowed tools from Silas to repair his bargain basement fiddles. Charlotte went on. "He's been missing since Saturday. His mama's beside herself." A prickling crawled Silas's scalp. Junebug had visited the workshop Friday afternoon, rhapsodizing over the Harvest Festival fiddle and promising to drop by again soon. What if he'd stumbled on Levi's operation and been forced to keep quiet, or worse? Moonshiners protected secrets with fists and fire. Deputy Amos showed up just as Charlotte was tightening her bootlaces. He accepted a biscuit, listened without interrupting, and then blew out a slow breath. "Revenue agents been sniffing over the county line. If somebody's running a still here, they'll be jumpy. Silas, I'll need you to guide me to that gulch." "I'll guide," Charlotte interjected, "while Silas minds his tools. No sense risking the hands that craft our music." Amos flashed a half grin. "Deputize the whole town, why don't I?" But their plan shelved itself when Nettie May burst in. Junebug's dog came home alone, mud-caked and whining. They're starting a search. Silas's heartbeat stumbled. If the boy was hurt or worse, every moment counted. "Amos," he said, "let's go now. Charlotte too." They hiked the ridge in a somber single file, a light rain hissing through leaves. Silas carried the firstborn fiddle again. It felt like both torch and compass. At the mossy boulder, he played the same clear E. The echo carried, warped and wheezing from the gulch. Amos's brow furrowed. That ain't natural. They slipped downhill, keeping to fern pockets, until the copper still showed between trunks. Smoke snaked from damp wood beneath the boiler, but someone had abandoned the fire. They saw no Levi. Instead, sprawled beside a mash barrel, lay Junebug Turner, wrists bound with baling twine, a bruise blooming along his cheek. Charlotte dashed forward before Amos could stop her. She checked for a pulse. Faint but steady. Amos cut the twine with his pocket knife. Silas knelt and draped his jacket over the young man's shoulders. Junebug's eyelids fluttered. "Don't you fret, boy," Silas whispered. "You're all right now." They half carried, half walked him up to the old road where Amos's cruiser waited. Rain intensified. Under the shelter of the hatchback door, Junebug croaked a single word. "Fiddle." Silas squeezed his arm. "Safe at the shop. Why'd Levi have you out here?" Junebug swallowed. "Heard me practicing by the creek last week. Said my tunes covered the clang of his still. Wanted me to play every night so hikers wouldn't notice metal rings. Told him no. He knocked me cold." Charlotte brushed wet hair from her face. "So the echoes we heard came from his big copper dome," Junebug finished. "It warps whatever bounces off." Amos radioed for an ambulance and backup. Silas stared into the trees, rain soaking through his shirt. Levi was out there somewhere, wild with fear or fury. Backup arrived, but a thorough search produced no Puckett, only footprints leading toward the abandoned mining spur. Amos posted 2 deputies on the ridge and drove Junebug to the clinic. Charlotte headed home to call the boy's mother. Silas returned to his workshop, lit the wood stove, and considered the puzzle. Levi needed 2 things: quiet to cook his liquor, and someone to blame if revenuers closed in. Junebug had refused to be an accomplice. Silas had witnessed the still. He and the boy were both liabilities. Was Levi desperate enough to silence them? Maybe. But mountain criminals often balanced meanness with self-preservation. If Levi believed the law was closing, he'd dismantle the still by nightfall and vanish to cousins' land in Tennessee. Sound, Silas thought. Sound had started this whole mess, and sound might end it. He retrieved a slender walnut fiddle he'd been setting up for a travelling Scots-Irish duo. Walnut gave a darker voice, mournful, capable of threading through pines like smoke. If he planted himself near Levi's hideout and played, the man might assume the echo effect was failing and come check his equipment. It wasn't the kind of plan a sensible luthier concocted, but Silas had rarely been accused of sense where music was concerned. He telephoned Amos, who, after a stretch of silence, agreed to station himself and another deputy inside the mining shed. "You play your tune, we'll do the rest," the deputy promised. Dusk came silvery and cold. The rain had quit, leaving wet leaves slick underfoot. Silas stood by a rocky outcrop overlooking the still. He resined his bow, took a steadying breath, and launched into Bonaparte's retreat, letting each note swell and linger. The walnut box sent a dusky lament rolling down the slope, and sure enough it bounced back twisted, clanging like a cymbal inside the copper dome. Silas paused as if to tune a peg, giving the echo room. A figure barged from the thicket, lantern swinging. Levi Puckett plunged into the clearing, cursing at the kettle. Silas drew his bow across the strings again, softer, repeating the theme. Levi kicked the lid, listening, muttering. When he turned to fetch a wrench, Amos and Deputy Keller stepped from the shadows, guns drawn. The confrontation ended in seconds. Levi dropped the wrench, mouth sagging. "I ain't hurt nobody," he began, but Amos read him his rights while Keller cuffed him. Silas lowered his fiddle, the last note hanging in humid air, like the hush before snowfall. Days later, the county hauled away the still. Revenue agents praised Amos's sound-based sting, though they barely hid their amusement at the idea of weaponized fiddles. Silas returned to the patient labor of cutting purfling grooves and carving scrolls, yet each shave of wood felt sweeter now, as if the tools themselves applauded his audacity. Junebug healed quickly. The festival committee insisted he open Saturday's concert, and Silas offered the walnut fiddle as a loaner, while the boy's own instrument spent time in the repair cradle. On festival morning, the courthouse lawn blossomed with booths, quilts flapping, sorghum bubbling over propane burners, pumpkins stacked like orange cannonballs. Nettie May sold fried apple hand pies. Charlotte hosted a "Guess the Weight of the Honeycomb" contest. Backstage, Junebug flexed his fingers. "I still hear echoes at night," he admitted, voice shaky. "Give 'em something worth echoing," Silas said, tightening the boy's bow hairs. Junebug stepped to the microphone. He opened with Angeline the baker, his bow flying light and sure. The walnut fiddle sang, pure as stream water. A hush fell, followed by applause that rattled courthouse windows. No echoes, no sour clamors, just the clean chorus of townsfolk clapping in time. Silas leaned against a dogwood tree, arms folded. Amos ambled over with 2 paper cups of cider. "Take this before Nettie May spikes the next batch." They sipped in comfortable silence. Finally, Amos spoke. "You ever think of writing down that method? Might help law enforcement elsewhere." Silas laughed. "The day big city police requisition handcrafted fiddles is the day I retire." "Careful," Amos warned. "Innovation's contagious." Charlotte joined them, cheeks rosy from cider and success. "At least we solved the mystery before Silas's Harvest Festival fiddle went wanting a home." Silas nodded toward the grand prize display on the flatbed stage. His butter blonde fiddle, strings gleaming. "We'll draw the raffle tonight. Somebody's getting a good companion." Charlotte smiled, and we all got our harmony back. Evening settled, trailing gold light across the hills. Junebug played encore after encore, each tune rolling gentle as wagon wheels. When the raffle winner, a shy 6th grader named Riley Dunn, clutched the blonde fiddle like it was spun sugar, Silas felt the mountain breathe easy again. Later, as the crowd drifted home, Silas walked the lane beneath stars. The woods were quiet. No warped answers chased his footfalls. He paused at the workshop door, and for old time's sake laid his bow across the strings. One soft A note shimmered through night air, returned exactly the way it had been sent, true, whole, and honest as Appalachia itself. Satisfied, he went inside, shut the door, and let the silence ring.